Hey there, do you want to buy a talking horse? What, he can really talk?
I certainly can. I've also starred in Hollywood films, caught criminals as a police horse, and I've won the Grand National.
Wow, why would you want to sell such an amazing horse? 'Cause he's a liar. He's never done any of those things. We're right back to a knight in full motion for this one. The Knight of Swords is a card of swift action and determination. Just look at him, he's off like a rocket. Sword held aloft and charging into the storm like he's a madman. Certainly a lot more animated than the Knight of Cups, who was basically sat on his arse. This comes down to the elements. Cups and Pentacles are seen as passive, while Wands and Swords are the more active elements. Now, because the nature of Knights is to be in motion, that did give us some tension in the suit of Cups, but not so with the Knight of Swords. He's like a dog with two dicks. Our threaded weight says he's riding in full course as if scattering his enemies. In the design, he's really a prototypical hero of romantic chivalry. He might almost be Galahad, whose sword is swift and sure because he's clean of heart. So there you go, it sounds like he's fresh from the round table and ready to go slay a dragon. I think what we're seeing is an abundance of energy, and here that's in the suit of the intellect, so it manifests itself as pure determination, someone who's willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want. Now that's brilliant when the knight is focused on something and has a clear idea of what he's doing, but it can go tits up when he isn't. Recklessness and acting without considering the consequences can be a downside of all this wild energy. Rachel Pollack says the young knight rides directly into the storm, waving his sword in his eagerness to overcome all difficulties. He's brave, skillful, strong, yet he tends also towards wildness, even fanaticism. He recognises no limits. Aggression is another important aspect of this one. All that unfocused energy can result in frustration if it's not directed at a clear vision, or if the knight encounters problems that can't be solved with brute force. Have you ever been in a situation where you're really determined to get something done, but the whole world just seems to be working against you, and you just get more and more wound up until you explode? That can be a Knight of Swords situation. Some problems can't be solved by just charging at them. They need careful planning and a more considered approach. However, the overarching theme of the card is grabbing the bull by the horns and going for it. The knight's attitude is the kind of adolescent confidence we find in ourselves when we're really up for the challenge. The Thoth card. Crowley says this chariot is drawn by winged children, looking and leaping irresponsibly in any direction that takes their fancy. They are not reined but perfectly capricious. The chariot consequently is easy enough to move but quite unable to progress in any definite direction, except by accident. This is a perfect picture of the mind. Ah, so that's what they are. Okay, well that makes a lot of sense. Crowley's making the point that we talked about earlier. When the energy is undirected, we can find ourselves going all over the place. That's like when our mind is buzzing with ideas and excitement, but it's all happening so fast that we can't pin anything down. It puts me in mind of the chariot allegory that was put forward in Plato's Phaedrus. Plato's phallus? What kind of channel is this? A brief history of Plato's Phaedrus. The Phaedrus is a dialogue between Socrates and Phaedrus that was written by Plato in around 370 BC. The dialogue covers many aspects of the human condition and the nature of the human soul, but perhaps the most famous is the allegory of the chariot. Here Plato used the metaphor of a chariot drawn by two horses to represent the soul's journey toward enlightenment. In this sense, the charioteer symbolizes our intellect, or rational part of the soul, while the two horses represent our noble and base desires. The allegory illustrates the struggle of the soul to balance our different impulses in the pursuit of wisdom and transcendence. Now, I did talk about this same concept when I made my video for the chariot back at number 7 in the trumps, but I think it's even more appropriate for the Knight of Swords. This whole idea about having to stay focused so we can prevent our horses from pulling in completely different directions. Crowley goes on to say the figure of this prince is clothed with closely woven armour, adorned with definite device, and the chariot which bears him suggests even more closely geometrical ideas. Milo Duquette talks about how we encounter this idea of the mind pulling in different directions all the time. He says, like a madman whose brain creates only to destroy, we see the prince with the sword in his right hand, with which he creates ideas and images, and the sickle in his left hand, with which he immediately cuts them down. This sounds like madness, but we are doing the same thing every moment of our waking lives. The Sforza and Marseille cards both serve up a pretty generic offering. Two knights sitting on horses and waving their swords around. Whoever painted the Solar Busker card was obviously having a bit of trouble squeezing it all in. The fella on the card looks like he's about ready to smite someone with that sword. It is no longer a fortunate time, where the earth produces tasty fruits everywhere. Yeah, I wouldn't exactly say that times have been particularly fortunate lately, and I, for one, have received absolutely no tasty fruit, unless you're counting that mouldy turnip the fool gave me last week. That was a perfectly good turnip. It had a beard, full of beardy goodness.
The Hermetic title for the Knight and Prince of Swords is Prince of the Chariot of the Winds.
Chariot of the Wind sounds like a toilet after a baked bean eating competition, so we're sticking with the flatulence theme. Another title is Prince of the Sylphs and Sylphides, so we've still got the spirits of the air flying around for this card. Apparently sylphs are responsible for the movement of the air and all kinds of weather phenomena, so the next time your umbrella blows inside out, you'll know who to blame.
The Knight and Prince of Swords corresponds to the zodiac signs Capricorn and Aquarius.
We've got the goat back from the Devil card. Capricorn is the cardinal zodiac sign of Earth and is associated with hard work, ambition and discipline. It's also my zodiac sign, so I'm not entirely sure about the discipline aspect, but I can definitely attest to the hard work part. You can also be a bit moody. What do you mean? Aquarius is the fixed sign of air and is sometimes associated with variety and spontaneity, so it's interesting that we were talking about the horses pulling in different directions earlier. That's kind of what the zodiac signs are doing. Knight of Swords notable people include Grand Prince of Russia Ivan the Great, Alice in Wonderland author Lewis Carroll, and Second Man on the Moon Buzz Aldrin.
The Knight of Swords resides in the world of Yetzirah and sits at the sixth Sephira of Tiferet, together with the Six of Swords.
We've made it all the way back to the Sunny Sephira of Beauty, and we've got two very different cards living here. The Six of Swords was all about a quiet passage, while the Knight just comes charging through in his size 12s. You could look at this as two aspects of Tiferet. On the one hand, we've got the idea of moving steadily into a calmer and more tranquil state, and on the other hand, we've got the drive towards spiritual ascent. As this is also the Sephira of Balance, we can say that it represents the harmony of those two opposites. Crowley talks about how Tiferet represents the midpoint between divinity and manifestation. He says this Sephira in some respects is the most important of all. It is the centre of the whole system. It is the only Sephira below the abyss, which communicates directly with Keter.
The Knight of Swords herb is wild cherry balm. This herb can be used to clear the lungs and is also a symbol of honesty.
Honesty is the best policy.
Which means dishonesty is the second best policy. But what does it all mean?
The Knight of Swords is a card of swift action, determination and charging problems head on. We're in the suit of swords, so we're talking about the intellectual aspects of that. Confronting problems by using logic and reason, so that means being very direct in tackling a situation. That can go either way in a reading, depending on the context and the other cards in the spread. Waite's got a big old list of words to kick off his interpretations. He says skill, bravery, capacity, defence, address, enmity, wrath, war, destruction, opposition, resistance, ruin. There is therefore a sense in which the card signifies death, but it carries this meaning only in its proximity to other cards of fatality. So he mentions death there, but he's not suggesting that the knight signifies death in itself. I think he's talking about how swift action can emphasise the finality indicated by other cards. Now, dealing with problems by charging them head on is the part that can go either way. In some cases, it can be entirely appropriate to approach someone with cold hard truth and brutal honesty. However, that's not always the best way to deal with a situation and can potentially cause more problems than it solves. Being mindful of other people's feelings is something to bear in mind when this card shows up in a delicate situation. We've also got the idea of being full of bravado in an attempt to maintain our identity. You could call it putting on a brave face in order to protect our ego and not show any vulnerabilities. Rachel Pollack says his bravery, his skill, his readiness to charge all problems can sometimes contain a fear of losing his innocence, that strong belief in himself. I talked earlier about the difference between the Knight of Cups and the Knight of Swords. In the Cups we saw a romantic, dreamy figure associated with emotions and intuition. That's in stark contrast to what we see with the Knight of Swords. Now, while all of the Knights are associated with action and movement, the Knight of Cups focuses that energy on his imagination and emotional fulfillment. Pollack goes on to say the opposite in many ways of the Knight of Cups. He directs all his energy outwards. He is perhaps nervous of being quietly alone with himself. Crowley talks about how the flood of ideas can create a loss of direction with the Prince of Swords. He says a person thus symbolised is purely intellectual. He's full of ideas and designs which tumble over each other. He has all the apparatus of thought in the highest degree, intensely clever, rational, but unstable of purpose. It predicts to a woman that she will defeat one of her rivals with a talent she cultivates with great joy. It's going to be that ping pong ball trick, isn't it? When the Knight of Swords turns up reversed, it can indicate the impulsiveness we were talking about earlier. Waite says reversed: imprudence, incapacity, extravagance. So we're talking about how the more forceful aspects of the Knight can be the wrong approach to take in some circumstances. Considering the consequences of our actions is something to keep in mind for the upside down card. Rachel Pollack says he's extravagant, careless, excessive. His charge becomes wild, a mistaken approach to a situation that calls for a quieter, more careful approach. No ill-dignified description from Crowley for this one, as the Prince of Swords is pretty ill-dignified already. This card appearing in the reverse predicts to a man that he will have an argument with a fool. It's called a feather. No, it isn't. There's no such thing as a bird leaf. The big takeaway from the Knight of Swords is swift action, overcoming obstacles, and charging at our problems head on. That might not always be the best way to deal with an emotional situation, but when it comes to achieving our goals, there is no better way. Dale Carnegie once said, "Inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. If you want to conquer fear, don't sit at home and think about it. Go out and get busy." All this talk of knights waving their swords about reminds me of my younger years. May the coming days bring you action and courage. Until next time.